You're listening to a bonus episode of The Dairy Edge, featuring Teagasc's weekly Let's Talk Dairy webinar series, which is also available as a podcast.
Morning, everybody. In a slight departure from the norm, I'm going to interview Stuart today. Normally, it seems to work the other way. My name is George Ramsbottom, and I work with Stuart as we're both dairy specialists with Teagasc. Stuart's based down in Moore Park, as you know, and I'm based in Oak Park in Carlow. I'm a Midlands man. I don't have a Cork accent like Stuart, so I don't have the same level of street cred. All right, Stuart.
I don't have a Cork accent either, though.
I sure do. On today's webinar, we're going to talk a little bit about the whole issue of roadway surfaces, and we're going to talk a little bit about a survey by a master's student who was working with us in Moore Park for about a year and a half. Very good young fella called Paul Maher from my own county, County Laois. So you'd have to be good, Stuart. We're going to talk about some of it. We're going to look at a fraction of the work that Paul was reporting on in terms of a large-scale survey of dairy farm roadways from all around the country. So, Stuart, you're going to present one or two of the sides. I suppose why roadways are important. I'm here in front of me. I have you can't see it there. We have the dairy lameness booklet that was launched a few weeks ago. And in that booklet, when we go to the roadway sections, what it says about them is poor quality roadways and gateways are major risk factors for lameness. In grazing herds, the quality of the roadways is the single most important factor that farmers need to get right.
So George, I suppose it's following on from what I've been talking about. We'll say I was talking about the principles of the on-off grazing last week as well, and I suppose roadway networks and Patrick as well, that obviously works with us in the specialist team as well. Patrick is always talking about how the fat in the road starts to come up when the weather gets wet. And like the end of October figures are showing that we had nearly 9 inches of rain here in Moore Park. And we've had similar levels around the different parts of the country, maybe not as much in parts and a bit more in other parts. So roadways have really been tested, I would say. Now, in a lot of cases, cows are gone in many cases at the moment in the short term. But when they do go back out again, roadways can be under pressure. So as you said, this is only a section of what Paul has been covering. But I just thought it was nice in terms of the way it's tying in with what we spoke about last week and what you're hoping to talk about there in terms of the lameness piece next week as well with Ned. So just, I suppose, to give people a bit of background, as George said there, Paul started a master's and he's actually going to turn into a PhD. Pat Toohey was telling me the other day. So he did an assessment of kind of roadway condition, and he's also looking at the paddock sizes on farms as well. So the roadway assessment is kind of a subset of nearly just over half of the farms that were looked at in terms of paddock sizes and the mean distances that animals were travelling and so forth. There was a couple of conditions needed to be right in terms of actually using the information for the roadway assessment, I suppose. So just farm maps, good information or good recording of grazing data, etc., so that we could see where cows were travelling and how often they were travelling, etc. There were some of the factors that came into the whole process. So Paul looked at several different elements of the roadway. He was trying to quantify the effect of the ranging widths and the surface conditions and how they impact on the throughput of animals on farm roadways. So there's 55 farms selected for the study, and you can see the map there on the right hand side showing that they're basically from Mizenhead to Mallinhead, more or less, and everywhere in between as well. And the herd sizes vary from 47 cows up to 760 cows. So very well spread out across the herd size categories, okay? So I suppose, like you were saying earlier, George, how did we manage to get 893 roads from 55 farms? Like the roadways were assessed from the point at which they were joining the farmyard, but obviously there could be a main kind of central route through a farm, and obviously offshoot roads then as well. So they were all kind of classified as individual roads and examined. So you could have a very good main route through the farm, but the sub routes off the farm or off that main route mightn't be up to scratch. So in total, there's 126 kilometres of farm roadways that Paul has reviewed, and the spur roads that were used that were on those farms were not assessed as part of that study. It's purely looking at the main thoroughfares that the cows are walking on consistently. So spur roads obviously only been used at the shoulders, maybe in tricky weather during other periods of the year. and wouldn't be as influential, I suppose, in terms of lameness, because they're so narrow. You don't have traffic on them as such, so they're not inclined to get damaged. So the metrics that were used in terms of gathering of data, so the width of the roadways, the crossfall, and the slope or the incline on it. So the slope of across the roadway obviously influences where the cows are going to stand on the roadway and so forth. And then the surface condition, their ability to actually shed water, and any congestion points, and the presence of water troughs on the roadways were recorded. So presence of water troughs would be generally correlated with cows stopping to drink, where they stop to drink. Anytime a cow stops, once they start again, they lift the tail and they leave a deposit behind them, which actually leads to a degradation of the roadways over time. So the roadways, where roadway surfaces around water troughs will get damaged far quicker than other roadway surfaces. So the index that they used, George, then I suppose to try and grade these roadways was like Pat and Paul Murphy in CIT or MTU Munster, as it's called now, I think. They would have come up with a classification score. So we're going to just show you three of those categorizations. We'll say from its index 1 to index 5. But quite obviously, index 2 is going to be intermediate to index 1 and index 3, and index 4 is going to be intermediate between 3 and 5. So index 1 here, this is the poorest surface that you're talking about. So you can see here that we have the verges are basically stopping any surface water getting off on both sides here. Ideally, we're talking about trying to lift these roadways up over that verge here, or at minimum cleaning away that verge, so that the water can shed off the roadway, which it's no different to a public road really, George, in terms of if there's water sitting on it, you get that natural freeze-thaw action over the winter, etc., in potholes and so forth, and it forms potholes. And the same is true of farm roadways as well. So you can see on the left-hand side here in this picture that we've a lot of water gathering on it, a lot of muck and dirt, and you can see that there's a pool of water further down as well. And what these pools of water do actually as well, and I saw a case of it, a very bad case of it here a couple of years ago, not too far away from Moore Park with one of the clients here, was that the cows actually stopped when they came to the water. They weren't unsure of their footing, basically, so they couldn't see where they were putting their feet, and basically treaded through it very carefully. And as a result, they actually dung quite a lot in that area then as well. So it further exacerbated the situation in those roadways then, George, I suppose. And the remedial action for that was literally to raise that roadway up to stop that ponding in that area for that farmer. And ever since, that problem has been alleviated completely by virtue of correcting that roadway. I know there was a bit of time and effort had to go into correcting it, but it paid dividends at the end of the day. And then look, this I suppose there's two issues you could point out in this, George, here. Apart from the surface here, there's no fencing along by this dike here, which is obviously a concern from a nitrates point of view. And also just basically banks getting broken down, because the tendency is for the cows either to walk on this track, which they've managed to form over time themselves, and means that they're going to be stretched out quite in a long line. They're not going to use any of the rest of that roadway there. But also if they stand into that grassy verge there over time, that bank is going to start to erode. And the roadway is going to get narrower, and there's also going to be sediment getting into the dike there as well. So that's going to be a concern from a water quality point of view. So moving on to our index. Go on.
Yeah, that pathway there in the previous slide, Stuart, is a prime indicator that there's a problem with the track, isn't it?
Oh yeah, 100%, George. They don't want to use the rest of the roadway, and they'll line up to try and follow the track because it's compressed. So there's less likelihood that they're going to tread on stones in that area. But they've treaded on them in the past to create that track. Like, I suppose it's just repeated use of it it's basically they've compacted that area and made it.
It's going there the whole time. And why that hits the index 1, Stuart, is because of the roughness of the road surface, and the picture on the left hits it because of the pooling of water and that kind of thing. Isn't that it, really?
Yeah. So the surface here could have actually been good at one stage, George, on the one on the left-hand side. But it's just because of the build-up of rainwater. And look, these grassy verges, like I've seen roadways that have been done even in the last 12 months where those verges have been removed, and they reoccur very, very quickly. Like, and I know John McCabe did events with us there a few years ago as well, and he was just demonstrating, like, if that roadway surface is actually above the level of the field there now, in that picture it kind of looks like it might be a bit of an issue that the fall of the field is towards the road anyway. So this roadway may need to be risen up anyway. But if the roadway is above the surface of the field already, there's shores need to be opened up in that basically, and it's really only a shovel. And like John was making the point a couple of years ago at some of the walks that we did, that it was literally maybe instead of taking the quad out for the cows one day, you take the shovel out and walk out and just open a few points along the roadway just to let that water off. And the value of that can't be underestimated in terms of maintaining road surfaces.
Okay.
So just
that's index 1, Stuart. Now you've better ones then. Index 3 would be the kind of middle range, and index 5 is the high quality surface. Isn't that really it?
Yeah, sure. Like your index 5, George, is what we have here on the Moore Park Farm, obviously, and across the road in Curtains and over with Ricky and Kilworth as well. And look, there are a lot of dairy farms as well now. They've really improved their roadways and they have this kind of surface, but they do take constant work basically to maintain them. So there's a bit of topping and tidying needed on them. I suppose the most important thing that you can see on the index 5, and we'll come back to the index 3 in a minute, is that it might be hard for people to see there, but there's actually a higher centre on that road. So you've got to fall off to the right and fall off to the left on both sides there, which is obviously helping that roadway to shed the water very quickly. Now, I suppose people will argue that there's obviously a fence line on both sides there, so it's a little bit easier. But if we go back to our index 1 here, if we can raise the level of the road here, because again, I suppose just not being sure about whether there's a ditch or whether there's a dike outside of that, we need to get that fall back out into the field from the point of view of irrigation, etc., to comply from a water quality point of view, that there's no potential runoff off of roadways going into surface waters, that it's actually pushed out across the field and allowed to soak down through the soil then, which will kind of filter it naturally as well. So those index 5s obviously are the very good surface. You can see little or no kind of stone that cows are going to be worried about treading on, and they'll walk on quite quickly on that, George. And I suppose one of the lads that used to work with us, that's actually dairy farming himself now, would have given me a figure there a number of years ago where he had installed new roadways on the farm, and he said that following along the cows very gently with a quad, that the cows were travelling on the new roadways that he'd installed at about 5 kilometres an hour, whereas on the older roadways, which were slightly narrower now, which would have had a contributory factor to it as well, they'd only travel at 3 kilometres per hour. So you can see the impact that can have in terms of speed and movement of stock around the farm as well. But I suppose coming back to the index 3s, George, there's probably a lot of roadways are falling into those categories, and we'll see that in a minute in the categorisation. But like, these are roadways that were, but from my looking at these pictures and talking to Paul about it, they were actually good roads at one stage maybe, but over time they've just deteriorated because of lack of maintenance. Now, some of these roads are roads that aren't being used very regularly, so you're getting that grass building up there maybe. You can see down here that there's tracks being created by machinery going down there as well. So I suppose it's just kind of natural maybe compression of the roadway by heavy machinery, and machinery is just getting bigger and bigger year after year. So they can have a negative impact on them. And look, in an ideal world, we wouldn't be travelling on cow roadways with slurry tankers in particular, and silage trailers as well. But that's not feasible really in reality. So it's just the maintenance piece. Again, the verging here is like this road, if left on, basically won't be long becoming an index 1 road over the next number of years. And it's a serious issue, I suppose, from the lameness point of view. As you said there at the outset, it's a critical factor in terms of lameness in herds. So there's a bit of cleaning here, maybe a bit of side trimming on the hedge here, cleaning away that verge there, and a topping is all. I suppose the important thing here, George, is that some of these roads can, with very minimal investment in, we'll say now this year or next year, will actually be back to this kind of standard. Whereas if we actually leave them deteriorate to the index 1 standard, there's quite a lot of work needs to go into them. And this can be done quite quickly. There's a couple of people working across the country now that are specialising in doing this work, and they can actually do this top surfacing very, very fast. So it's not the hardest job in the world to do.
Yeah.
So just, I suppose, to give people an idea, the categorisation, how did the study roadways fare out? And I suppose it's slightly concerning, I suppose, that 25% of the roadways on the 55 farms that Paul looked at were scored at index 1. So that means that there's a very, very poor quality roadway surface on a share of these roadways. So that's basically of the 900 roads, a quarter of them, which is 150 is a charge or more. No, it's probably closer to, it's more 225 or something like that.
Yeah.
Were we're actually substandard. And I suppose if we take it that we're accepting an index 4 as being good, relatively good or close to good, because obviously we can't maintain our index 5 permanently. It's a bit like soil fertility. I suppose our line is going to drop a little bit, but then we need to top it back up again.
Yeah.
So we have, as people can see here, that we've 19 and 14 basically given us 33, 34%. So about a third of the roadways were kind of where we'd like them to be. And then we can see that the balance, obviously the 18 and the 23 here, closer to kind of 40 odd, 50% there.
42%, yeah.
Coming in at kind of okay-ish, I suppose. I suppose the index 2 is probably more inclined to go towards the index 1. So I suppose if you combine the whole lot there, George, you're saying that there's nearly just 42% of all roadways are either index 1 or index 2, which is concerning. Considering, I suppose, that the farms maybe used in the study would be considered to be probably maybe more progressive farms as well, by virtue of the fact that they had to have a lot of the other factors for the whole study that Paul was looking at as well. So maybe that would suggest that some farms, or that we could be looking at least 50% of roadways not being of being substandard out on the dairy farms across the country, like.
Absolutely. Mad, isn't it? How is making them at all?
I suppose we get a lot of people can get caught up about health effects in the EBI and lameness traits and so forth, and yet the mechanical side of things, they might be very they're doing no favors to the cows to allow them to, they're expecting them to walk on nails basically, like. So I suppose just to summarise it, George, poor quality roadways, as you said at the outset, are a major risk factor for lameness, and like roadway quality is the single most important factor contributing to the increased risk of lameness. So that stands to reason we can breed all the cows we like in terms of resistance to lameness and strength towards lameness, but if we have bad road surfaces, cows are going to get soil ulcers, soil wounds, and look, Nate will pick up on that, which will be maybe next week in Natasha as well. So it's, I suppose, basically the long and short of today's session really, George, is that we'd be advocating that people would assess their roadway condition now, and where necessary take steps to improve the roadways before the 2023 grazing season starts. So I'll stop sharing there if you want to throw any questions into us or anything, folks.
Yeah, so if there's any questions, just pop them in there. What I picked up there, Stuart, just to summarise, is that a lot of roads are substandard. Lameness is going to arise on those roadways. It's the single most important factor. And maybe if you could assess the roadways now and maybe just even work on a bit of them. It sounded to me, Stuart, from your talk that often the presentation there, that maintenance is a big part of keeping the road quality right. And cows are off the roads now, or will be, over the next couple of months, and it's a good time to maybe get to do a bit of work on them and get them sorted out.
Yeah, like I suppose the challenge with the way grazing has gone to, George, I suppose, with the trying to follow where the right cover is. There was a period in the time in the past maybe where you weren't going to be going a particular section for a week because we were grazing in a rotation always, and you could actually work on a roadway during the grazing season at that time. But I suppose the fact that the cows could be here today and over there tomorrow means it's that little bit more tricky. And the other thing is it's probably important that roadways get a chance to bed in as well. So if they're done kind of, now the weather conditions at the moment are atrocious obviously for doing that kind of work, but if we got kind of any sort of dry weather there into November or December, it would be a fairly timely thing to do, to be cleaning up roadways and so forth. And I suppose I would say as well, George, that actually that piece that comes from where the yard connects, like Paul has looked at there maybe, but where the yard is connecting to the roadway, they just tend to they deteriorate way quicker, and they probably need some sort of surface maintenance every year, I would say. And I know I see lads scraping the we'll say just where the cows are coming in and where the cows are exiting. Obviously, as I said, every time cows go to move, they do start to dung. And that means that there's quite a level of build-up of dung around that maybe first 50 to 100 metres maybe coming away from the parlour, depending on the siting of the parlour, etc. And people go cleaning that, and then they actually ravel the surface as well. So that means it needs to be topped up, and definitely that's feasible to do during the close period, except when we're indoors.
Okay. Look at we're not going to go on all day on the call, Stuart, or the presentation here today. I suppose what we'll do is we'll take the lameness conversation on a little bit further next week. And I've invited Ned Dunphy from the FRS in Kilmacthomas, I think he is, he's in Waterford anyway, to join us. Yeah, to join us next week. And maybe go into a bit more detail on some of the types of lameness that cows can be affected by. And maybe it's a good time to be looking at that just as cows are being housed at the moment, because there's often a prime time when soft hooves cause lame cows, and it's a good time to talk to Ned just at housing time.
Okay.
So without further ado, 10 o'clock next Thursday morning, we'll continue the conversation with Ned Dunphy from the Farm Relief Service and Natasha Brown from Moore Park. Thanks very much, Stuart, and thanks to all of you for listening, and a safe farming week.
That's all for this week's bonus episode from the Let's Talk Dairy webinar series, and don't forget to look out for more bonus episodes each week. I'll be back with the usual Dairy Edge podcast on Monday, so do listen in then. I'm Stuart Childs, and thanks for listening.